Hi, this would be part 3 in a 2D game tutorial in Unity that's focusing on a 2D gameplay where we are creating player movement and adding more and more to our game after that. Previous videos talked about how to set up basic player movement with a player movement script and how to connect a camera so the camera follows the player movement. This will be a player character movement variation in the form of like a platformer side-scrolling game where we can move left to right but also hit the spacebar to be able to jump. So let's go to our player movement script, and we can use the same exact script, just edit this, but in case you wanted to have a game that has different types of movement, so like a flying space movement, jetpack movement, and a side-scrolling kind of walking jumping movement, what we're going to do is create another player movement script and call it platformer, copy over some of this and make our adjustments for the jump ability. So let's go back into Unity, and in our scripts folder I'm going to right click and choose create C# script, and we'll title this to begin with the same player movement, and we'll call this player movement platformer. Player movement platformer. Alright, so we're actually going to override or replace our current script. We can't have more than one and it work easily here. So we're going to replace our player movement script in our player object in the inspector. I'm going to click the three dots beside our player movement script and choose remove component. So that way I can add my player movement platformer script to my player. So we will drag this player movement platformer script to the player component that adds the player movement platformer in there. Alright, in our script editor, I'm going to open up my player movement platformer script right beside my player movement script. And I'm going to copy my lines of code down here underneath where it says public class player movement. I don't want that line. But I'm going to drag from my bottom line up into the line right above that. And I'm going to use Control-C. And in my player movement platformer script, I'm going to drag select to underneath the public class and paste the rest of my code in here. Because I want to keep my float variable, I want to keep some of my basic actions like connecting to my rigid body component, and then a couple of my lines of code from my void fixed update, and then I'm going to make a couple of adjustments and additions here. So one new variable that I'm going to need is going to be a jump velocity. So I'm going to return down underneath my public float variable of speed, and we'll do public float, and we'll call this one jump velocity. And I'm using camel case, so basically my first word is all lowercase, and then velocity is all uppercase. Okay, so I need another variable that I can then adjust in Unity on the fly. I'm going to keep my speed, I'm going to add jump velocity. Alright, and then I also have my private rigid body variable called RB1. I'm going to keep my void start the same. I want to add my rigid body get component, rigid body component to my RB1 there. In my fixed update, I'm going to keep my move horizontal, which I'm going to use my input axis of the left or right arrow key or A or D. I am not going to use vertical. I'm going to use a spacebar to jump input command instead of W or S or the up and down arrow. So I'm going to remove out the second line. Now, just before you do all of this, I am making sure I'm in my player movement platformer script and not in my player movement script. So I am going to keep my float move horizontal input get access horizontal to allow my character to move left or right. I'm going to remove out the next two lines because I'm not going to need those. Okay. And I'm going to use void update to add my space. So let's delete those two lines out. But I need to add one more line of code to allow the horizontal motion to be set up in a slightly different way. So this method is actually going to use a transform dot position. And we're going to do the plus symbol and then the equal symbol. So plus or equals to a new vector 3. So previously in the player movement we did vector 2 movement, new vector 2. We're going to use the vector 3 this time. I'm going to do parentheses and we'll do move horizontal. Okay, move horizontal. And we're going to do times speed, so that allows when I use A or D, it will multiply this according to my speed variable. And then we need to do times time dot delta time. So we want to do it times time, but instead of times time dot time, which would be adding times every frame, we want to do delta frame, which is going to check it not every frame, but less than every frame, so faster, right? So it's going to be better for any kind of motion. So anytime we're doing player motion, this is going to be a lot easier if we use delta time. All right, so then we need to do, that's our first vector attribute or value. Then we're going to do 0, 0. Okay, that's the other two vector values. So we do vector 3, move horizontal, times speed times delta, times time dot delta time is the x value, or the horizontal motion. And then the second one's going to be y, and the third one's going to be z. We're just leaving those as 0 because we don't want this to be adjusted whenever we transform the position. All right, so that is all we need for the horizontal motion. This is just a different way to set up horizontal motion. We still need to get access, and then we're going to say transform.position plus equals new vector 3, and then parentheses move horizontal times speed times time dot delta time, comma 0, comma 0. Okay, we need a semicolon at the end, and that's it for fixed update. Underneath void fixed update, we are going to add void update. Spell correctly, update. There you go. And with my autocorrect, it tries to do a private void. All right, so void update, open curly bracket, end curly bracket, and the space input needs to be done in void update instead of fixed update. So basically we need to know if it is the space bar is clicked or down, and then produce vertical actions. That's what we're doing here. So we're going to say if, it's going to be an if statement, if input get key down, which is what key press is down. It's another way to do key presses. If input key down, and we need to tell it what key code, so let's do key code dot space. So this is the space key. Then do something, right? If the space key is pressed down, what do we want it to do? We want it to find the rigid body, so RB1 dot velocity, so the speed of the rigid body, equals vector 2 dot up, which is the vertical axis. So basically up axis, if the space key is pressed, then we're going to add velocity to the up attribute times jump velocity. Okay, we'll do semicolon. All right, so basically we're going to determine what the jump velocity is in Unity, similar to how we did the speed. So however fast the jump velocity value is determined, it's going to propel our character up that height, dependent on the rigid body. All right, so let's hit Control S to save. Let's go back into Unity. See if we got any warnings or errors. Looks like we're good. And let's play. So we have gravity. So let's keep gravity at 3, and let's put gravity back at 1 for right now. And then we need some speed. So let's put 5 for speed, maybe 5 for jump velocity, because we need some initial values, otherwise the commands won't do anything. Speed for 5, jump velocity for 5, and gravity scale to 1. So let's hit play. So we still have gravity, so the character should still fall down. I should be able to use A and D to move the character side by side. And now I should be able to hit spacebar to allow the character to jump up in the air. Now it's not very fast or high, but the character can jump up in the air. So that's the core essence from a platformer game: left-right movement, spacebar to jump. Now we can play around with this a little more to adjust the speed, jump velocity, and even the gravity scale to be a little bit more natural. It looks a little bit floaty. Let's increase our gravity scale to 3. We're going to make sure collision detection is continuous. And then speed, let's increase that to 10. And let's increase our jump velocity to 20. That'll make sure the character can jump higher. Okay, so let's hit play. Alright, so the character definitely falls down faster. I can still move my character left and right. And then when I hit spacebar, the character jumps about 3 times as high as what it used to jump. Alright, so I can jump around, I can move around, I can jump while moving, I can jump stationary as well. And I do have that linear drag still on there, a value of 3 there, so that it will stop some, so it's a little bit more natural gravity. So that's how we can set up a basic kind of platformer action with the player movement with a slight variation to the script. Alright, so in the next couple of videos we'll talk about how to refine this a little more. We'll add some platforms, we'll add some pickup items, we'll come back and adjust the player movement as well, because one thing that the jump does not account for is if I spam click jump. Right now it'll allow me to continuously jump as high as I can if I continue to hit the space bar, and we want to make sure if the player is on the ground then allow us to jump. If not, we can't jump if we're already in air. Right? So we want to limit the amount of jumping. We'll come back in a later video and talk about how to adjust that. So what we've done so far is set up a couple different variations of how we can move the player around with WASD or A and D and the space bar. And we've synced up our camera so it follows the player around, and made some refinements to the rigid body and our speed and jump velocity attributes or variables to refine it to our liking here. Alright, that'll wrap it up for this video.